Should have brought water. Sure. I might need a thumbs up on when to go. When to start. And how close to get to the microphone is a good question. Somebody give me a thumbs up when to start. I'm good. Okay. Okay. Hi. My name's Sonia Douglas. I'm going to be presenting on exploring the relationships between autistic family members. And oh, great. This is the playback. My name's Sonia Douglas. I'm going to be presenting on exploring the relationships between autistic family members. And it's okay. At least I know I can hear myself. I mean, at least I know people can hear me. Testing. Okay, great. Okay, so I'll start again. So the slideshow. Oh, is it okay if I just go like this instead? Like myself? Does that work? Okay. Okay. So I'm Sonia Douglas, and I am presenting on exploring the relationships between autistic family members and their siblings and the differences based on gender. So I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a post-baccalaureate in the undergraduate program right now at Brooklyn College, and next year I'll be going to Hunter College for the Master's in Speech Language Pathology. Right now I'm on the board of the Brooklyn College National Student Speech Language Hearing Association. I'm the social media manager and the events coordinator. I'm also a mom of 3, and my oldest has autism, so this topic is dear to my heart. I'm working with a wonderful professor, Akiko Fuse, who's my mentor and has been facilitating and guiding my research on this topic. So let's talk about what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'm going to answer some questions for everyone. The first question is, what is autism? The second will be, how does it affect the family dynamics? And what are the themes that are specific to gender? So what are the themes that are specific to sisters of a person with autism? And what are the themes that are specific to the brothers of a person with autism? And then there are some things that are notably neutral, and then I'll have a conclusion. Okay, so let's talk about autism and what it is. According to the DSM-5, a child must have persistent deficits in each of 3 areas of social communication and interaction, plus 2 of 4 types of restricted repetitive behaviors. So the social communication aspects that they must have all 3 in are deficits in social, emotional reciprocity, and deficits in nonverbal communication behaviors that are used for social interaction. For example, eye contact, body language, and the understanding of nonverbal communication, lack of facial expressions, and deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. The restrictive and repetitive behaviors that it might be 2 of these 4. So stereotyped or repetitive movements, whether it be flapping or echolalia, repetitive speech over and over again. Insistence on sameness, so inflexibility in routines or ritualized patterns, and highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus, and hypo or hyper activity to the sensory input or unusual interest in sensory aspects of their environment. So they can also have a level of severity. So level 3 requires substantial support, level 2 requires very substantial, and then level 2 is substantial support, and level 1 is just requires support. Okay, so now we know about autism. How does it affect the family? Some of the behaviors can increase stress within the household. Some of the behaviors like impulsivity, antisocial behaviors, difficulty understanding and misreading people's intentions, or rigidity can affect the behavior of the sibling with ASD and can lead to situations that can be stressful and sometimes even frightening for the family members of the family members. Studies have had mixed and inconsistent results on how this affects the siblings in the family. But that is just an indication of the nuance that goes into family dynamics in general and sibling relationships in general, let alone when you put in someone that has to put an extra effort in order to meet typical social expectations. Stress can also be the result of financial and time strains from the assessment and treatment process. Simple communications on daily items take extra effort, and parents can end up focusing on the child with ASD more than the siblings, and having different expectations between the children. The family may have more limited social interactions and have to cater to the sensory needs of the child, while also taking into account the reactions of a potentially uneducated surrounding community. Neurotypical children can take on more of a caretaking role earlier than other families, and that's known as parentification, and may eventually take on a permanent caretaking role as the siblings progress into adulthood. So with all this, many studies have shown that siblings receive many positive aspects from this particular family dynamic, including social adaptability, positive warm feelings towards their sibling, and pride towards their siblings and towards themselves. Sibling relationships can morph over time, and this is true for families that have an autistic family as well. So I'll give a quote. Sibling relationships provide physical and emotional contact at critical stages and help children learn social skills. They are usually the first, most intense, and longest peer relationships that an individual will have. So my research has looked at how gender plays a role in this relationship when specific to families that have a member with autism spectrum. Okay, so we will start with sisters. And a lot of the research brackets it into the different stages of life. So the relationships tend to morph over time. And they isolate the samples into age brackets, and it shows evolving themes with each bracket. So starting with school-age children, according to a study, female siblings tended to focus on the relationship with their sibling with ASD and the communication difficulties. They tended to talk about their difficulty communicating with their sibling and often worried about how their sibling would do socially within the community. Another qualitative study identified sisters in this age bracket as a nurturer and was easily able to identify the positive aspects of the relationships with their sibling. Now with adolescents, this is a unique age bracket. It has its own social connections. So many studies did this age bracket, and it turns out that adolescent sisters perceived that they took on too much household tasks, that they received less parental attention than desired, that they took on an advocate role within their community with words describing them like mother hen, maternal, protector, and bodyguard. They felt like they had to be a liaison between teachers and students and protect their siblings from bullies and educating all of the above on ASD, autism spectrum disorder. Another study found that this age bracket felt that their siblings received special treatment from their parents and struggled with their siblings' rigidity and the siblings struggled to meet social conventions. They felt tension between wanting to distance themselves from their sibling but also engage with their sibling. Another study showed that this age bracket tended to distance themselves during conflict. There were many positive aspects reported in this age bracket. Sisters felt good about themselves and being able to help and advocate for their siblings. They felt pride in the amount of responsibility and displayed a large amount of resilience within the challenges of the family dynamic. Another study showed that adolescent female siblings had the highest average social competency scores. For adults, one study showed that female adult siblings spent the most time in their shared activities with their sibling and were the most engaged in that shared activity compared to another gender. So for brothers, one study for school age showed that brothers this age desired to play more with their sibling with autism spectrum disorder. They frequently mentioned their feelings about the aggressive behaviors by their sibling. And in another study, fathers perceived their neurotypical son as being more kind and more involved to their sibling relative to the fathers of the sisters. In adolescence, one study showed that brothers had more conflict with their sibling than sisters did, and they didn't pull away from the conflict as the female siblings did. They stayed with the conflict. Another study showed that neurotypical adolescent brothers had more conflict with their siblings than sisters. In another study, neurotypical brothers had the lowest social competency scores as compared to the sisters. Now, as an adult, it was found that adult brothers with sisters with developmental disabilities were the least involved and had the least engagement and had the least positive affect towards their siblings with ASD, autism spectrum disorder. So there's a lot of things that are notably neutral to gender that they noted within these studies. So one study showed that mothers rated both male and female siblings of school age to have the same rate of empathy toward their sibling with autism spectrum disorder. And continue on with school age. Another study showed that there were no significant differences between genders on the adjustment of the sibling, whether it be internalizing conflict, externalizing conflict, or social or emotional adjustment. Another study noted that the level of loneliness in all the groups did not associate with gender, nor did the level of social functioning or adaptive functioning. For adolescents, the positive affect toward their sibling was not affected by gender, nor was their engagement in shared activities. As an adult, one study showed that the life areas that were affected by the sibling with autism spectrum disorder did not differ depending on gender. And another study showed that the way the neurotypical sibling coped with their emotions toward their siblings as an adult did not vary by gender. So, these are themes in the research. So that doesn't mean that these themes are definitive and that it's an indication of causation. So one thing to note within these studies is that there are limitations. And it's worth mentioning some of the limitations that were mentioned in these studies. So many of the studies had limited demographics, that the demographics were Caucasian, male, or the demographics weren't even mentioned. And some of the studies had really small sample sizes, so 22, 7, 11, 32, and some had larger sample sizes. Most of the studies had both parents involved in the family, and one thing that I think is really notable is that the people in the studies were people who already sought out care. So these were people who had resources to seek out care, they had the education to know to seek out care, and they were already involved parents. So that might influence the dynamics as well. So, in conclusion, siblings have an impact on the experiences and quality of life of both of the siblings, both the sibling with autism spectrum disorder as well as the neurotypical sibling. The sibling relationship will evolve throughout the lifetime, and there are implications that gender affects the different aspects of these relationships. By studying and analyzing these experiences, we have better insight into the nuances that shape the lives of the families where a member has autism spectrum disorder. Doing this helps to more precisely target areas which may need more support, whether it be the emotional support of the neurotypical child during childhood and adolescence, or programs of assistance for adults with autism spectrum disorder and their caretakers, which could likely be their sibling eventually. And I'll show you my references. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to the HSS Expo organizer, to my audience, and to Professor Akiko Fusei for organizing such a wonderful event. So thank you so much.
Can I start? You guys can see me? Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Jaylee Jagan. I'm currently a senior here at Brooklyn College. I'm also a speech language pathology major, and in the fall I'll be going to Hofstra University to complete my master's in the same program. Today my goal is to bring to light listeners' perceptions and attitudes on accented speech, and I've had the pleasure to work with Dr. Fusei to bring to light more information about this, since it's not the word I'm trying to. It's not researched more. It's not more research has not been conducted. There you go. Just some background. According to ASHA, or the American Speech Language Association, an accent is a way in which speech is pronounced by people in the same language, and this can be regional or it can be foreign. Accents can reflect factors like socioeconomic status and geographical and ethical background. Perception of accents are influenced by listeners' familiarity with the accents and attitude towards the accent's culture. Accents can also have a positive and negative connotation towards the speaker and the listeners. Intelligibility and comprehensibility. Communicative effectiveness can be measured by accentedness, comprehensibility, and intelligibility. Comprehensibility is the listener's perception of how difficult an utterance is understood, and intelligibility is how accurately a native speaker understands the utterance. There was a study done that explores intelligibility and comprehensibility. 8 speakers recited a passage in 4 accents: Indian, Russian, Spanish, and Chinese. 3 researchers reviewed these samples, and 10 students rated the intelligibility. A survey was also done after the I'm sorry, after the speech study was done, and that measured the intelligibility and personal qualities for speech-language pathologists. The results show that correlation between perceived intelligibility and certain personal qualities were strong, but weaker for patience and empathy. Correlations between professionalism, intelligence, and resourcefulness were moderate to strong amongst the 4 accents. Factors related to speech perception. The listener's education and occupation can also affect perception. A study done in 2023 examined listener factors like education and occupation and how it affects perception between regional and general English, American English. The study took samples from the IDEA of native English speakers, and 20 monolingual English speakers rated the intelligibility. A survey was also done to rate perception. The results in the study found that higher education and occupation status may influence how accentedness is perceived and accepted by the audience. Now, subtitles. When you think of subtitles, you think of Netflix, you think of I'm watching a show, I'm watching a movie. click on the little subtitles and I put it on. Subtitles are usually for the audience to help them understand what's saying, and subtitles can facilitate processing of foreign accentedness. So if you're watching a show or a movie and an actor has a foreign accent that you might not be familiar with, the subtitles can help you understand what they're saying. This provides an additional way of accessing lexical information to present in the audio. An article was written about this, and within the article, 3 studies were conducted. Study 1 utilized a story/fill-in task, and it was found that subtitles increased listeners' fluency. Study 2 also replicated the same study as the story/fill-ins, but the participants were told that the speakers were from China, so they had a Chinese accent. And it was found that the subtitles increased the listener's fluency and produced a positive reaction. Study 3 utilized an unsubtitled version of the previous 2 studies, and this was found that the familiarity increased the processing of fluency. Overall, the results show that listening to subtitled or familiar audio recordings increased listeners' fluency and acceptance of the audio. Effects of accents and listening comprehension. So accents can affect listening comprehension from second language learners. A study done in 2023 was with Chinese second language learners and how accents, Australian and British, affect their learning. They also used a fill-in-the-blank listening test, which was given to access the students' ability to understand vocabulary and important information. Intelligibility was affected by the proficiency, speaking rate, and accent preferences. Role of processing fluency. There's been research that was conducted that foreign accented speakers are perceived to be harder to understand. In 2016, a study was conducted that conducted experiments for this. Experiment 1 had participants listen to audio recordings of a short story with either background noise or free of background noise. The speaker has a standard American accent or a Punjabi English accent. The results found that noise will affect the fluency. Experiment 2 duplicated the first one, but it had a more controlled categories, with the participants knowing the communicative consequences of their processing difficulties. The results were the same, that in a noisy environment, the ability to process fluency is reduced. The results from both experiments suggest that foreign accented speakers may be evaluated more negatively in a noisy environment. Attitudes towards accented speakers. Listeners' attitudes towards non-native talkers can influence their ability to recognize foreign accented words. In a study done in 2017, it tested this statement. They took 5 non-native English speakers and produced speech stimuli. Each participant spoke English as their first language and had no more than a mild hearing loss. The listeners were assessed on their vocabulary processing speed, cognitive flexibility, auditory working, memory, and inhibitory control. Listeners rated the accented talkers' manners of speaking and completed a speech perception task. The results show that listeners' attitudes accounted for speakers' performances and how it is processed by listeners. Accent familiarity and the language attitudes of perceived English. Accent familiarity and language attitudes can affect speech evaluation. A study done in 2016 was conducted. The participants were divided into 5 groups based on their familiarity with Korean and Arabic accents. They completed a rating study and a background study, which included a language history, familiarity with foreign accents, and attitudes towards foreign accents. The researchers expected that the participants with the most knowledge and familiarity with the accents, Korean and Arabic, will outperform the ones that aren't. To conclude, accentedness can affect how clear communication comes across in the audience. There are many factors that can affect how the message is received by the audience. Factors like intelligibility, comprehensiveness, perception, message familiarity, accent familiarity, education, and occupation. At the end of the day, more research needs to be done since accentedness is not spoken that much about, and it is very important to understand how well the audience perceives a foreign accent. My references? Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody here for listening, everybody online. I'd also like to thank the HSS organization and Dr. Fusay for allowing me to talk to you guys today. Thank you.
So, hi everyone, my name is Justin Pacione, and I'm an undergraduate student here in the Communication, Arts, Sciences, and Disorders Department at Brooklyn College. My goal one day is to work as a speech and language pathologist, working under the guidance of Dr. Fusay. I was fortunate enough to participate in research looking through the diversity, equity, and inclusion lens in our study of how well speech and language services support individuals in three different nations, which is what I will be discussing with you today. So, this presentation will be a brief background on our current study of speech and language services across the USA, Japan, and Zambia, which inherently encapsulates the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion due to the unique socio-cultural contexts, healthcare systems, and educational programs of each country. Each of these countries exhibits rich diversity in terms of language, culture, and socioeconomic backgrounds. By studying speech and language services in these diverse settings, we can gain insights into the varied needs and challenges faced by individuals from different cultural and linguistic backgrounds. Equity in speech and language services ensures individuals, regardless of their backgrounds or circumstances, have access to the same quality of care and support, so that we may look out for disparities that may exist due to socioeconomic status, geographical location, or cultural norms. By comparing the availability, affordability, and effectiveness of speech and language services in the USA, Japan, and Zambia, we can identify disparities and advocate for policies and practices that promote equitable access to these services for all populations. And inclusion in speech and language services means creating environments where individuals feel valued, respected, and supported regardless of their linguistic or communication abilities. This involves adopting inclusive practices and accommodating diverse needs and preferences. Research can explore how each country's healthcare system integrates inclusive practices into speech and language services, such as providing culturally competent care and offering bilingual services. So this is just the agenda for the presentation. So current study, our study compared three countries, the USA, Japan, and Zambia, regarding the nature of speech and language services available. We looked at factors such as knowledge and awareness, technology, supportive services, as well as cultural differences. We specifically looked at medical conditions with speech and language disorders, and this is what we learned. So, in the United States, speech-language pathologists tend to be highly knowledgeable due to numerous graduate and postgraduate educational programs specializing in communication sciences and disorders. Readily available information about communication disorders and disabilities online and from institutions, as well as collaborative work among specialists treating speech and language conditions. In Japan, medical professionals most knowledgeable are therapists, educators, with parents and caregivers being less so. Societal collectivism may contribute to social distancing towards the disabled in Japan. There is stigma around those with disabilities due to collectivist culture ideology and standing out from the group. And in Zambia, there is a lack of knowledge among professionals about developmental disorders and disabilities. Inadequate transportation and overcrowded waiting rooms adds to the issue. There is also limited access to health information for healthcare workers, as well as healthcare typically being ad hoc with no central policy set up by the government. Tech, in the United States, most Americans can access health information online, with over 90% of U.S. households having access to the internet and Wi-Fi. In Japan, only 22% of the internet use the internet for health information, with delays in digital transformation and Wi-Fi issues negatively impacting over 90% of internet access, resulting in slower adoption of technology. There is also a problem of underinvestment in information and communication technology, with 80% of spending going towards maintaining legacy technology, which is outdated technology. And in Zambia, only about half of Zambians can access internet or Wi-Fi, and for most technology is limited, unreliable, and unaffordable, with very few individuals having access via personal computers, and most using smartphones for internet access. So, in the United States, federal laws like the Individuals with Disability Act help ensure children with speech and language disorders receive support and services in educational settings, and Medicaid and private insurance cover speech and language therapy services for those who are eligible. In Japan, the government determines fees so that there is no price competition. However, 80% of medical facilities in Japan are private. Clinicians are also forced to work for lower wages than most other G7 countries, with many hospitals being unable to provide public health care due to provider shortage. A newly enacted law also prevents clinicians from working too much overtime. And in Zambia, while healthcare is universal, it's very basic due to an overtaxed healthcare system. Only critical cases get help from a government-funded hospital. There is also a limited number of hospitals, with hospitals being in the capital city of Zambia, which is Lusaka, eastern, northwestern, and central provinces, but there is no budget for ear, nose, and throat treatment. And with half the country, which is roughly 16 million Zambians living in poverty, healthcare is unaffordable for many. In the United States, legislation requires children under 3 years of age with disabilities to have early intervention, assessment, and treatment at little or no cost, free assistive technology, essential to education for school-age children, such as AAC devices, such as tablets, laptops, assessment and treatment at no little cost. I said that. And free speech and language pathologists as part of an individualized educational program in special education and also for school-age children. And the Assistive Technology Act program offers information on programs varying by state. Japan is one of a few countries using disability IDs, which is a strategy growing in use to promote disability inclusion, referred to as shogaisha, or a disability certificate. While various types of disability certificates are optional, an individual must have one to take advantage of discounts, such as benefits regarding transportation and financial assistance. Speech and language therapy is rarely available and must be paid for by a caregiver, and is often not possible for many Zambians, while a shortage of speech-language pathologists means they are not available in schools and rarely offered elsewhere, with only 3 internationally qualified speech and language therapists for the capital city of Lusaka. So, American individualistic culture, with its emphasis on being distinct from others, means personal goals and ambitions take priority over group interests, and many Americans will typically look to seek out help if they have a medical issue, while the Japanese emphasize the well-being of the group over the individual with a collectivist culture, which sometimes prevents parents from seeking help for children, as there is a cultural fear that the children with a disability would be seen or treated as different. And Zambia is also a collectivist culture with decisions typically being made by the family or community. Some Zambians have cultural and spiritual beliefs that a child born with a disability is considered bad luck or an ancestral curse, bringing shame to their family, the sins of the parents, or demonic possession. This may lead to caregivers to hide their disabled child from the community and not educating them. Now we're going to take a look at some of the major successes and remaining obstacles found in our study. So in the U.S., speech and language services remain strong in the following areas to the benefit of those with disorders and disabilities. It's a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach, means involvement of an important range of professionals along with comprehensive assessment, diagnosis, and intervention. In terms of regulation, bodies such as the American Speech Language Hearing Association and state licensure boards ensure standards and quality of care and practice, along with many robust educational and training programs for speech and language, focusing on evidence-based practice, clinical proficiency, and cultural competence to address diversity, equity, and inclusion, including the needs of the population. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, enables states and local educational institutions to receive federal funding to assist in the education of students with disabilities from ages 3 to 21. For youth who qualify for special education, an individualized educational program is typically developed. Technology is another advantage in the United States with advancements such as compliance services, in particular important for remote or underserved areas, as well as assistive devices such as laptops and tablets being accessible, giving those with complex communication needs the means to express themselves effectively. The U.S. also faces challenges when it comes to speech and language services for children, their parents, and their caregivers, including speech and language services varying widely depending on geographical location, socioeconomic status, and ethnicity, leading to disparities in care. There are also issues with healthcare insurance, so that while insurance coverage for speech therapy is mandated by law, it may be challenging to navigate policies and obtain coverage for necessary services. The U.S. is also facing a shortage of providers in some areas. A lack of qualified speech and language pathologists causes long wait time for service or limited options for those in need. A final challenge is cost of services, so that even with insurance coverage, families may face high out-of-pocket costs for speech and language therapy. This is especially true for individuals who need long-term intervention. In Japan, speech and language services are gaining in terms of support due to universal health care that provides medical services, including speech and language therapy. Early intervention programs for children with developmental disabilities may lead to better outcomes in speech and language development, and community support where various systems and nonprofit organizations offer resources and assistance to families of children with speech and language disorders. Students with disabilities in Japan typically receive special education and support in several settings, including regular classrooms, special needs schools or classrooms, and Sukiyu classrooms. And the Sukiyu classrooms refer to a special program for disabled students enrolled in regular schools who visit the Sukiyu classroom several hours a week and received individualized or group lessons tailored to specific needs. When it comes to speech and language services for individuals with disabilities and disorders, Japan faces challenges in the areas of there being a shortage of speech language pathologists like there is in the U.S. Specifically trained to work with children is where the shortage is, who need help regarding communication issues, leading to a limited access to services provided by speech language pathologists. There is Also, cultural stigma surrounding disabilities, which may affect acceptance of speech and language services for children with communication problems. Zambia's successes when it comes to serving individuals with their family and speech and language disorders and disabilities is leading for better services to those affected, as well as government initiatives in which Zambian leadership is attempting to improve services for children with communication disorders via inclusive education policies with provisions for speech and language therapy. Zambia faces many significant challenges when it comes to providing speech and language services, such as limited resources when it comes to things such as healthcare infrastructure, lacking trained professionals and specialized services for individuals in need of speech and language therapy, with access to healthcare being limited in the more rural areas and remote regions, and as well as cultural beliefs and misconceptions regarding disabled individuals with disabilities and disorders may impact parents and caregivers' willingness to seek out and utilize speech and language services, as well as financial constraints, making speech and language therapy out of reach for many Zambians, even if services are provided in their area. So, my key takeaways. While countries like the USA have more established systems and resources for providing speech and language services for individuals with speech and language disorders and disabilities, other countries such as Japan and Zambia face unique challenges related to access, awareness, and resource constraints. Efforts to address these challenges require a combination of policy initiatives, community engagement, professional training, and international collaboration to ensure that all children, their families, and their caregivers have access to the support they need to reach their full potential in communication and development. So, what we can do going forward, here are some recommendations specifically for these three countries, and we will also have also general future directions, which we believe can help. In the United States, fixing the shortage of speech and language pathologists by conducting research on underlying causes, how more speech language pathologists can be recruited, and raising awareness of speech and language disorders via educational and fundraising events. In Japan, setting up programs to raise community awareness in hopes of better education on speech and language disorders, as well as getting more international speech language therapists to go to Japan in underserved areas, and lastly, to promote the need for better Wi-Fi services in areas that have poorer internet accessibility. And in Zambia, obtaining financing for a program to improve quality of life for those suffering from communication disorders, raising awareness, and educating caregivers as well as the community about speech and language disorders, also providing assistive technology to those with speech or language impairment, giving them alternative ways to communicate, and lastly, training medical professionals, teachers, speech language pathologists, and communication science students to efficiently aid those with speech and language conditions. And So, building on insights gained from our study on speech and language services, we can pursue a number of future directions to further advance the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion in this field. For policy advocacy, we can leverage the findings from our study to advocate for policy changes at national and international levels that promote equitable access to speech and language services. This may involve lobbying for increased funding for services in underserved communities, mandating cultural competency, training for healthcare professionals, or developing guidelines for inclusive service delivery. For cross-cultural collaboration, promoting collaboration among researchers, clinicians, and policymakers from different countries to exchange best practices and develop culturally responsive approaches to speech and language services. This can involve joint research projects, international conferences, and professional development opportunities focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Community engagement, reaching out to diverse communities to understand their specific wants and needs and preferences regarding speech and language services. This can be done through outreach programs and partnering with local organizations serving marginalized communities. Technology integration can play a crucial role in helping to improve access to speech and language services, especially in remote or underserved areas. This can include telepractice, mobile applications, and online resources tailored to different cultural and linguistic groups. And workforce diversity. Encourage diversity within the speech and language pathology workforce by hiring professionals from underrepresented backgrounds. This could be achieved through targeted recruitment efforts, scholarships for minority students, and mentorship programs. And lastly, continuous evaluation and improvement on an ongoing basis. Evaluate the effectiveness of DEI initiatives in speech and language services and adjust as needed. This can involve collecting data on service utilization, patient outcomes, and satisfaction levels among diverse populations in order to identify areas that need to be improved upon. These are just my references. And I would like to thank you for the audience for their time and attention. I hope you found my study interesting. I would like to thank Dr. Fouze for allowing me to do research under her. I'd like to thank my fellow presenters, the audience, and I'd like to thank the organizers of the HSS Expo. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Aaliyah Seeley. I'm an undergraduate student at the Communication Sciences and Disorders program. The topic we're addressing today is addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, also known as DEI, in the graduation programs in speech-language pathology. I was able to conduct this research under Dr. Akiko Fouze. So what is DEI? First of all, the D stands for diversity. Diversity is essentially the representation of various identities and differences across cultures and identities in general. Equity is the E, which you want to ensure fair and equitable treatment and access and opportunity for everybody involved. Inclusion is the I. We want to make sure to make an effort to create environments that include respect and value all the people involved. So what essentially is the graduate program in speech-language pathology? Communication sciences and disorders are comprised of both speech-language pathology and audiology. For today's purpose, we're focusing on SLPs. They're responsible for preventing, assessing, diagnosing, and treating speech, language, cognition, social communication, and swallowing disorders from birth to adulthood. So this slide has a couple of diagrams that I'm going to address in terms of the American Speech Language Hearing Association, the demographics as of 2023, in terms of racial, ethnic, and the gender profile. So if you turn your attention to the race diagram, you'll see I have highlighted in red that the category of the majority of the members with the American Speech Language Hearing Association is white, so there's 90.5%. And in terms of gender, there's a 96.3% members for female. So that's an overwhelming majority. Even though the field needs to be diversified, we can see it's not that diverse, which is something that needs to be changed. So how about linguistic diversity in terms of different languages within CSD? So 8.3% of certified clinicians are reported to be multilingual, self-identify as multilingual. The majority of those multilingual providers are Spanish language service providers, about 66.9%. There are reported 86 spoken languages, according to ASHA, across the multilingual members. The majority of the members who self-identified as multilingual reside in Texas, California, New York, and Florida. Similar data is found for the Spanish language speaking providers are also in Texas, Florida, California, and New York. So demographics of the U.S. The number, according to the U.S. Census 2020, the number of Americans who identify as white will drop below 50% in approximately 20 years. And currently, the U.S. Census 2023 reported that 58.8% identify as white non-Hispanic, 75.5% as white alone, 13.6% Black African American, 1.3% American Indian, 6.3% Asian alone, 0.3% Native Hawaiian, 3.3% two or more races, and 19.1% identifying as Hispanic Latino. So as you can see, the United States is very diverse. In terms of language, 78.8% people speak English, but after that we have 13.3% speak Spanish, with 5.3% having minimal understanding, 3.3% speaking Indo-European language, 1.2% understanding minimal English, 3.6% Asian Pacific Islander language, 1.6% minimal understanding, 1.2% report speaking another language, with 22% in general speaking a different language other than English, and in total 8.4% having a minimal understanding of English. So there is as from the data I reported previously, you can see there is a big gap between the demographic backgrounds of communication sciences disorders, SLPs, and the U.S. population. The racial gap will continue to grow. As you can see, as I reported previously, only 58.8% of the population are reported white non-Hispanic, while 90.5%, I believe I said, are white for SLPs. As SLPs, we do serve a very diverse population within the United States, so it's important that the field is able to reflect that same diversity within our clientele as well. Along with the racial aspect, we want to consider the linguistic aspect and the diversity within language. It's just as important because at least 8.4% of citizens don't understand English in comparison to the native language. So bridging the gap. So what graduate programs can try to do to try and bridge this gap between for language and racial diversity is they could try and recruit more multilingual students. It's important for clinicals in general to develop cultural competency. And in terms of the training institution, we want to make sure we address DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to make sure we're bridging that gap. An example of this would be trying to provide more diverse populations for students to work with in the graduate program to make sure they're getting that experience that they need. In addition to that, making modifications to provide appropriate speech and language service to clients from both culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds is an important thing we need to do. So these are just some current approaches ASHA is taking to make sure that the graduate programs are actively trying to diversify the field. So right now, they're currently requiring that all graduate programs give students the chance to adequately identify and address cultural differences and how it shape their behavior when interacting with clients, examining their own potential implicit and explicit biases, reviewing and understanding how intersectionality as well as the impact of their own personal biases can affect their view on the cultural, linguistic, and environmental differences of clients' caregivers, including and among deaf and hard of hearing individuals, which is another part of the population that we also service, and gaining knowledge on how to use varying languages to give support to the clients being serviced, such as Ebonics or AAV would be a good example. So these are just some of my references, but before I want to emphasize the importance of diversifying the field in general, because even within New York itself, we know how diverse the population is, and if we're not able to diversify the field, we can't adequately support the people around us. So just a small thank you first to the HSS Expo organizers, the audience, and Dr. Kikufuze for allowing me to present my research.
So if you have any questions to any of the presenters, thank you for your attention. And our students really worked hard on the project. think Justin and Sonia, they've been working almost a year, and then Jaylee and Laya, you've been working, more than a semester, right? So that, finally, right? Finally, we have time to sort of share the accomplishment and also their knowledge. So, any questions? Anybody? Okay.
This is for any of you. I just wanted to see, because these are really interesting data, and especially the soil cultural aspect that you guys showed. I only heard the last two, I'm sorry, I came late, but seeing how nationwide these are within the U.S., how diversity is a big issue, and then seeing how internationally we see all these cultural differences. So I was just wondering, like, because these are big issues and there's no one straightforward solution to any of this, and it requires a lot of work for many people. I understand that, but so to any of you, like, what's the next step? Where would you go with this? Seeing that, like, that is a big issue, and actually we heard this at previous HSS Expo. I think the number is actually a little bit better. Last time it was 90-something%. Why? So actually we are doing better from, as I remember from a few years back.
Good memory.
Almost 2%. 2%. Okay. Almost. I remember that it was more than 90% white, and that was shocking. So you as future professionals, how do you see, what can you do when you face clients from different cultural backgrounds, and how can we serve them in the best ways, and what are your plans for future research? You are doing such great interesting research. I hope you will continue.
Yeah.
Anybody, it's a question for anybody.
I think one thing that we can do is first spread the profession more. I feel like as speech language pathology isn't really a well-known profession, so we have to actually get the word out first before we start really thinking about anything else.
Okay, so I'll go next. I think it's best, like, as we're learning, as we get clients and stuff, I think it's best to do background research. As you get the background knowledge of the client, like their culture, their traditions, I think it's best to do your prior knowledge based on that too, so you can further benefit their, like, therapy as well, because you need to facilitate based on their traditions, on how, like, their gender roles are, or how they speak, to make sure that it's not a speech disability. It could be just an accent difference. So I think that's just what should be done as well.
Yeah, that's very important. Language differences.
Yeah.
It's not my topic, but I think about it a lot. I think I used to live in a state that was had less diversity, and when I moved to New York, it really my world opened up. So I think when she said that you need to be exposed within the programs to more a culturally diverse clientele, I think that's important just because when you're exposed to it, you have a better understanding. I think for I think recruitment would be important, and I don't have the answer for that. Finding out where areas that need to have more education and like recruiting, and then possibly being more flexible in because programs can be really like master's programs can be really hard to get into. So if you have to be a little more flexible to in your program to accommodate like through time more multicultural students, that might be something to consider. I've thought about that. I think that's all I have on that, but I do think about it a lot.
So during my time at Brooklyn College, basically in all my undergraduate classes, all my professors said the same thing, how important it is to take culture, personal beliefs, religion into account. That's paramount to a successful treatment, I believe, because if the treatment options aren't in line with someone's culture, beliefs, then you're not going to get anywhere. So you have to take the time to know that background about the client. And as some of my other fellow presenters mentioned, I feel that there needs to bring more awareness to the field for the underrepresented demographics. Like, for example, men in the field, I think it's 4 or 5%. And I actually found about the field through a girl I know that's a speech and language therapist. So I think that incentives such as scholarships for underrepresented demographics would be a good idea, as well as bringing more knowledge to the public about the field. And you could do that, I believe, like I mentioned in my presentation, through events where you educate, and fundraising events as well. So I think that's my answer.
It's very important that if you look at where those men are, it's quite amazing that a very small percentage of men are in leadership roles, most of them. If you look at department chairs and PhD program chairs, and many of those men are actually not really out in the field, but are leading some of these programs. So it's even worse, I guess, if you look at just the daily practitioners. Many of these men actually build a career very fast because there are so few of them.
Wow.
And they end up in leadership positions, which is great. But
Yeah.
so in terms of serving the client, it's even worse. Thank you. So you guys are planning to do more research?
Hopefully.
Hopefully,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
You will
Yeah.
continue. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any more questions? All right.